My name is Evelyn Hart. I'm 33 years old. I hold 2 doctorates. But that's not what they see when I walk in. All those degrees, and she still couldn't get into the academy. My uncle's voice slices through the reception hall like a ceremonial saber. It's not a whisper. It's not even subtle. It's aimed. Laughter trickles behind his words, awkward, nervous. A few of them try to smother it behind champagne glasses and military pins. I don't say a word. I don't even blink. We're standing in the south wing of the Admiral's retirement banquet inside a historic naval hall layered in oil portraits and lineage. The ceiling beams are dark oak. The carpet beneath my heels carries generations of spit-shined boots. He's my mother's brother, retired Commander Paul Bishop. He says it loudly enough for the entire table to hear. Loud enough for my mother to sigh and excuse herself to the hors d'oeuvres. Loud enough for the cadets nearby to turn smirking. My hand rests lightly on my clutch. My name tag reads Dr. Evelyn Hart, but it's tilted sideways, barely legible. Across the ballroom, a man in dress whites glances up from his conversation. His insignia glints. Rear Admiral. He sees me. And then the pianist misses a note. The ice doesn't clink. It cracks. Small, invisible fractures crawling beneath every conversation, behind every plastic smile. I keep my gaze on the walnut-paneled wall ahead. There's a portrait of someone's great-great-uncle in formal saber grip. His face looks like it never had to prove itself twice, or even once. Behind me, I hear a fork touch a porcelain plate too hard. Someone clears their throat. Someone else chuckles one beat too late. And yet, no one addresses the comment, because they all think the same. 2 doctorates, 1 in defense logistics, 1 in artificial intelligence. But in this room, I'm the woman who couldn't pass her naval fitness test at 17. The woman who didn't wear a uniform. The woman who, according to their eyes, wasn't strong enough, didn't belong enough, and still came anyway. I shift my weight slightly. I can feel my spine straighten. Not because I'm proud, but because I have to. He knows what he said. Uncle Paul. He leans back in his chair like he's proud of the echo. He's the kind of man who served 24 years and still introduces himself with rank first at family weddings. He's the kind who told me at 15 that girls who think too much get in their own way. And now, after everything, he can't bear the thought that my name might hold weight outside his world. My cousin Amanda reaches for her wine glass and murmurs, "Ignore him, Eve." But she's not really defending me. She just doesn't want tension before dessert. My mother doesn't look back. She's still by the olives. I finally step away. I walk past their table, one silent footfall at a time. The air shifts as I move through it. I feel a few eyes on my back. But no one stops me. No one calls after me. I reach the edge of the ballroom by the double doors leading into the corridor. A Navy ensign nods politely as he passes, likely mistaking me for someone's wife or a civilian contractor. He doesn't recognize me. That's okay. Not yet. But the Admiral does. He's no longer talking. He's looking across the room, straight at me. I stare out the window, beyond the glass dusk over the harbor. A single ship anchored in still water. Its lights glint like Morse code. I breathe in, slowly. The scent of lemon oil brass polish and faint perfume lingers in the air. Every sound feels exaggerated, the clink of a spoon, the scratch of a chair leg, the hush of silk on carpet. I hear footsteps, not toward me, around me. They're adjusting positions, now spreading out, sipping, moving on. The moment passed, or so they think. The pianist finds his rhythm again. Someone laughs loudly near the punch bowl, and the room breathes again. The tension folds neatly into small talk, but I can still feel it lodged behind my breastbone. The way humiliation doesn't burst, it embeds. Quiet, heavy, familiar. I hold the stem of my glass like an anchor. A lieutenant commander stops near the portrait beside me. He doesn't say anything at first, just glances. Then, your doctor. Hartright from the Polaris group. His voice is careful, measured. Not demeaning, just unsure. Curious. I meet his eyes. Yes. He straightens. We studied your conflict modeling in Newport. I nod, then turn slightly back toward the ballroom. My uncle is still holding court, My mother's still pretending to admire the buffet. No one notices I'm gone. No one sees I'm already not where they left me. The lieutenant commander shifts about to speak again, but something in my expression must stop him. Instead, he nods respectfully and walks away. I stay there a while longer, not hiding, just breathing. They think their silence is power, that not saying my name, not acknowledging the work I've done somehow erases it. But silence can be shaped. It can be armor. It can be blade. They just don't know whose hands it's in. Yet. I wasn't supposed to be back here. Not for the awards. Not for the recognition. Not even for my parents' anniversary dinner. But somewhere between guilt and obligation, I boarded that flight back to Virginia. And as I stared out the airplane window watching the clouds split beneath the wings, I kept asking myself one thing. What was I hoping to prove? My name is Anila Rowe. I'm 33 years old. I hold 2 PhDs, one in systems engineering, the other in cognitive defense modeling. My work supports decision engines in military joint operations. I've never been in combat. I don't carry a weapon. And I've never worn a medal. But I've sat in control rooms during blackouts when lives hung in the balance because of a few lines of code I wrote. I work in what they call a civilian-military hybrid unit. My uniform is close to combat-issue digital camo patches name tape, but it has no rank insignia. It's a subtle reminder I'm not one of them. And I never will be. But sometimes on the right day in the right room, that's exactly why they listen. Not here, though. Not back in this house. Not around this table. My mom never quite understood what I did. She called it nerdy stuff. My father, a retired Navy logistics officer, always kept his respect for real service separate from whatever I did on a keyboard. And my sister Meredith was the golden child, charismatic, polished public relations officer with just the right rank to get invited everywhere and say nothing controversial. She's good at applause. I'm good at silence. That's what made me dangerous and invisible at the same time. When I arrived, they had already started pouring wine. Meredith's kids were running in the hallway half-dressed loud. My parents were beaming over a glossy magazine spread Meredith had framed Faces of Modern Naval Leadership. She wasn't even on the cover, but they acted like she was. I set my bag down by the coat closet. No one looked up. That moment stayed with me. Dinner wasn't about celebration. It was about proof, Meredith's proof of rising. My father toasted her before the turkey was even carved. Mom corrected the way I held my glass. And someone I don't know who asked almost lazily, "So, Anila, are you still doing your tech stuff?" "Still," I smiled. "Yes. We're prototyping decision tree escalation models for joint force simulations, high altitude and underground response scenarios. NATO's asking for early access." There was silence. Then my sister laughed lightly, pushing her wine glass forward. Translation, she makes diagrams for imaginary wars. Everyone chuckled. Even Dad. I excused myself to the kitchen, not because I was hurt, though I was, but because there was something hollow behind my ribs that needed air. There, in the quiet hum of the refrigerator, I remembered something. 6 months ago, one of my algorithms redirected a medical supply drone en route to a remote outpost in Poland. There was a misflagged GPS conflict in the target zone. My system caught it. The recalculation saved the drop. 10 soldiers got the supplies they needed. No one at this table would ever hear about it. And no one here would care if they did. I stepped outside after dinner. The night was cold. I didn't bring a coat. From the porch, I could see the stars. And for a moment, I just stood there, breathing into the wind, letting my shoulders drop. That's when I heard the door creak open behind me. It was my father. He stood next to me holding a steaming mug, plain black coffee always. "You look thin," he said. I nodded. "Long weeks." He was quiet a while. Then, without turning, he asked, "Do you regret not going active duty?" The question stung more than I expected. "I never wanted to be a soldier," I replied quietly. He took a sip, slow. "Then what did you want to be useful?" His jaw clenched. I could see it in the way he looked out across the lawn, eyes scanning shadows like an old habit from deployment years. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence said what he always believed. You can't be useful if no one can see what you do. Inside, the laughter had picked up again. Meredith was showing her kids how to pose in official salute mode. One of them dabbed instead. My mother caught my eye from across the room, made a polite gesture toward the living room. Join us. But I just smiled polite, detached. That's when the doorbell rang. Once. Sharp. No one moved at first. Then my dad stood too fast like instinct and opened the door. Standing there was a uniformed officer, gray overcoat, gold trim on the hat, not local. Definitely not part of Meredith's unit. Miss Anila Rowe. Everyone turned. He stepped inside and offered something that looked like a sealed envelope. You're requested at base. I blinked. Now, yes, ma'am. Colonel said it's sensitive. My father's expression didn't change, but I saw the way his hand dropped from the door frame. Meredith looked confused. Why would a colonel request? The officer turned to her briefly. Doctor, Rowe's designation matches a defense protocol for Tier 4 escalation simulations. Command flagged her by name. Dead silence. No one laughed this time. I took the envelope with both hands, nodded, and stepped toward the hallway to change. No one followed me. As I zipped up my uniform jacket, something settled in my chest, not pride, not anger, just clarity. They would never understand, but they would remember this night. And next time someone asked if I was still doing my tech stuff, they'd hesitate just long enough for me to say nothing at all. The hotel banquet hall was too warm, the air thick with perfume and the buzz of conversation, but I felt cold. I stood there clutching my iced tea like it was a lifeline, surrounded by the laughter of relatives I hadn't seen in years. The reunion was my mother's idea. It's time you reconnected, she'd said, as if I were the one who drifted, as if I were the one who forgot birthdays or let phone calls ring out. I'd flown in the night before, landed late, got to the hotel even later. No one greeted me. My cousin Shannon had walked past in the lobby, glanced at my suitcase, then kept walking like I was hotel staff. Maybe I should have taken the hint. I found my seat at table 8, right at the corner near the kitchen door. Not quite hidden, but not meant to be seen either. A folded white card read Anila, handwritten in blue ink, no last name. Everyone else had theirs printed. Across the room, I saw the long center tablecloth napkins folded into fans' wine glasses already half filled. That was where my brother Marcus sat in a tailored blazer, his new wife giggling beside him like she belonged here more than I did. My name wasn't at that table, my mom's was. She didn't even look in my direction. I listened as the family toasted his new real estate development, some multi-million-dollar commercial project in Austin. They clapped when he mentioned the groundbreaking date, and again when he announced a strategic partnership with a defense firm, dropping the name like it was sacred. My name never came up. I sat still and swallowed my pride with my drink. They knew I worked in defense analytics. Knew I'd just completed my second PhD this time in applied systems engineering. They knew, but they didn't care. To them, if I wasn't someone's wife or a CEO on the cover of Forbes, I was just an academic in a pantsuit. The type of woman who'd talk too long about satellite telemetry at Thanksgiving and get politely ignored. Shannon finally wandered over during dessert. She had a wine glass in one hand and a napkin tucked under her arm. Her heels clicked with purpose. So she said, eyeing my plain navy dress. Still in school, I smiled tightly. I finished in March. Oh, right, the double doctorate. That's intense. She said the word like it was a condition. I nodded. She leaned in. What are you even doing with it? Like in the real world? I could have told her about the system I'd helped design for humanitarian logistics, how we routed aid through unstable regions in ways that saved lives and costs. I could have mentioned the classified project my clearance allowed me into, or the cross-branch modeling system I built that got attention from NATO analysts. But she wouldn't understand. I work with the Department of Defense, I said instead. Mostly with predictive simulations and conflict resolution algorithms. Shannon blinked. So, like, computers kind of. She gave a small shrug. Well, at least you found your thing. Not everyone wants to be in the spotlight, right? Then she was gone. Later, they took a group photo by the large staircase. I was walking toward them, summoned vaguely by someone's wave, when I heard it. Wait, a voice said sharp and loud enough to stop me mid-step. It was my Uncle Vince. He stood by the photographer arm around Marcus. Let's do one with just the core family first. he said. No one objected. I backed away, nodded like I understood. The flash went off. Then again. And again. I never made it into the frame. In the elevator, I kept my hands folded perfectly still. An older woman beside me said, "You looked lovely tonight, but I barely heard her." Back in my room, I peeled off the dress like it was made of ice. My phone lit up with a message from my mother. "Hope you didn't take it personally. These things are always chaotic. Glad you could come, though. Everyone's proud of you." I stared at it. Then I stared at myself in the mirror. Dark circles, lipstick long gone, the woman they'd turned away from. I was tired, bone-deep tired, but something was shifting in my chest. Not anger, not even sadness, just clarity. They didn't see me because they'd already decided who I was. They'd built a box for me long ago, the girl who was too quiet, too bookish, too intense, who didn't date enough or wear the right shoes or laugh at the right jokes. And nothing I achieved would ever be enough to break that frame, not even 2 doctorates. So maybe I'd stop trying. The next morning I woke before sunrise. No alarm. I brewed black coffee in the little machine by the window, packed my bag in silence, slipped on my field-issued boots, then my gray cargo pants and dark-fitted shirt, the ones I wore for travel to joint command briefings, not because I wanted to impress them, but because that uniform reminded me of who I really was. At 7:00 a.m., I checked out. No one from the family had messaged, not even a goodbye. I pulled my rental around to the side entrance. As I got in, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror expression, calm eyes clear. They had turned away, but I hadn't, and I wouldn't, not from who I was becoming. I stopped wearing my name tag to events. It was subtle, almost defiant in its quietness. Everyone else had theirs pinned, even guests, but I'd take mine and leave it in my coat pocket. A tiny protest against the way they made me feel invisible, or worse, tolerated. My mother noticed first. "Anila," she said quietly before one of the banquets. "Don't forget this." She held it out, gold letters on a black tag. My name and the 2 letters they never spoke of. PhD twice over. I took it, held it for a beat, then slipped it into my bag without saying a word. She didn't push. I think that was the moment she finally understood that I was done trying to earn their respect on their terms. But knowing something is broken and being able to walk away from it are 2 different things, especially when it's family. That winter, I stopped showing up to every ceremony. The medals, the retirement speeches, the military dinners where I'd be introduced as Anila, our civilian, with a polite smile and then promptly forgotten. When I did attend, I started sitting near the back, close to the exit, wrapped in a silence that kept most people away, except for the Admiral's aide. He was younger, sharp, and didn't carry the same condescension in his tone. Once after a technical presentation, he found me by the coffee urn and said, "I Googled your dissertation after the talk, both of them. You made quantum field modeling readable. That's sorcery." I blinked. "Thank you, I managed." It was the first time in weeks that a compliment didn't come wrapped in surprise or sarcasm. But it didn't pull me out. I was still disappearing from my own life. I stopped submitting papers, stopped attending briefings unless my clearance was required. My lab coat stayed on its hook. I worked remotely more and more. The screens blurred together. Research felt muted. At one point, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window at night, half-lit, hollowed eyes, hair unkempt. And all I could think was, who is she trying to impress? Because it wasn't my family. Not really. Not my mother, who always glanced at my work like it was some hobby I'd grow out of. Not my uncle, who told me once that titles mean nothing in the field, even as he introduced his own son as lieutenant commander every chance he got. And not them, the gathering of men who sat at that table in the officers' club and dissected my identity like it was a fluke, a misalignment, a mistake. "She's smart, but you know." Not military, one of them had said just loud enough that I'd catch it. That moment haunted me, not because of the insult itself, but because I believed it. For weeks. I spiraled. It wasn't dramatic. There were no slammed doors, no screaming matches, just a slow fading, like color draining from a photo. Even the one person who used to check in, my cousin Kara, stopped asking how my work was going. She said she didn't understand it anyway. I'm sure you're still doing amazing things, she'd offer like it was a consolation. I wanted to tell her it didn't feel like it. I wanted to tell her that being the smartest person in the room meant nothing if the room had already decided not to listen. But I said nothing, just smiled, and faded more. Then one night, while deleting old email drafts I never sent, I found a message I'd written months ago to the Department of Defense liaison. A grant request proposal for a field model that had been rejected twice, not because of the science, but because the review board preferred a more traditional chain of command perspective. In other words, they didn't want a civilian leading the theory. I stared at that email, at the paragraphs of calculations, at the language I had softened suggests may offer insight worth exploring. I had shrunk myself in my own proposal. That realization hit harder than any comment from my family. They didn't believe in me, but worse, I had started not believing in myself. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I printed out every rejection I'd ever received and laid them across my apartment floor. A mosaic of dismissals, some polite, some patronizing, some that called me Ms. instead of Doctor even though I signed the letter clearly. I stared at them, and then I started circling the lines that made me small. Every time I softened a claim, every time I used passive voice, every time I justified my presence. The page was filled with red ink by the time dawn broke, and somewhere between the rejection letters and the sunrise I found something unexpected. Not anger. Clarity. I had never needed their approval to begin with. I had been playing a game I didn't even respect, seeking validation from people who wouldn't recognize value unless it came with a rank or a ribbon. And I had played it quietly for years, carefully, respectfully, strategically. But I had also been building something, a body of work, a record, a reputation outside their world. Maybe I wasn't part of their hierarchy, but maybe, just maybe, they were the ones out of their depth. Let me know if you'd like to continue with Section 5 strategy, but I was never powerless, or if you'd like to adjust anything here before proceeding. I didn't walk out of that conference room in defeat, not this time. The sting of being dismissed by my uncle, of seeing the amused glances from the brass as if I were some kind of joke, didn't crush me. It clarified things. Power, real power, didn't wear stars on its shoulder or throw titles across a room. It moved quietly underneath, like data, like code, like the systems I helped design but was never credited for. I went home that night to my tiny 2-bedroom apartment near the base and turned on the single desk lamp in my study. The room was cluttered with circuit boards, notebooks, and annotated maps, and in the corner my personal project Keystone waited. It wasn't military sanctioned, not officially, but its core algorithm was mine. And ironically, some of its subsystems had already been deployed in theater without anyone knowing they had my signature buried beneath 10 layers of obfuscation. I had written them, after hours, during coffee breaks, while everyone else played war games and smoked cigars outside the hangar. They never looked past the outer shell of me, small-framed quiet, always in the background, but I'd been shaping mission outcomes for years. Through predictive threat mapping, through adversarial modeling, through logistics AI that rerouted armored convoys seconds before ambushes. Not because I wanted glory, but because lives were at stake. Still, now, something had changed. Their disrespect had become dangerous. If they kept pushing out voices like mine, silencing perspective under the guise of tradition, people could die. Missions would fail, not because of a lack of strength, but because of the refusal to adapt. So I started pulling strings they didn't know I had. First, I contacted Dr. Siren, my old doctoral advisor, now heading advanced systems at Langley. She picked up on the first ring. Anila. What do you need? I told her what I'd been building, how Keystone could overlay historical data, behavioral shifts, and linguistic anomaly tracking into a single adaptive dashboard. She didn't interrupt. Just listened, then said, "Send it. Tonight." Second, I quietly looped in Commander Lane, one of the few field officers who had respected me back when I supported Task Force 92 during the Baltic drills. He remembered. He owed me. He didn't hesitate. "I trust your instincts," he said. "Just tell me what it needs." "Access," I replied. "Just give it access to sandbox deployment. Let it prove itself." Over the next 2 weeks, I lived in silence. No updates from my uncle, no word from the Admiral's office. Just me, the code, and the flickering terminal screen in my room that became my real battlefield. Keystone began performing simulations dozens a day across legacy Intel sets from prior years. The results were quiet but staggering. In one scenario, it detected a false positive that had nearly triggered an unnecessary drone strike. In another, it picked up a cross-border movement no human analyst had flagged. Word began to spread. Dr. Sarin called again. They want to see it. Not just the model. They want you. I froze. Who's they? Top tier, multi-branch, intelligence board, including defense signals, possibly even strategic command. I sat back, heart pounding. After years of hiding behind my reports of watching others stand in front of my ideas as if they'd birthed them, now they wanted me in the room. Not for my name, not for some title, but because the system I'd built could no longer be ignored. That night, as I stared at the glowing skyline outside my apartment window, I thought about my mother. The way she used to introduce me at family parties, "This is Anila." She's very technical. Not brilliant, not accomplished, just technical as if I fixed printers. And my uncle sipping from his scotch glass at every gathering, always saying the same thing. 2 PhDs and still doesn't understand how the real world works. I had never corrected them. Not once. Until now, I'd let their narrative win. But that was over. I printed the Keystone schematic onto archival paper, folded it into a sealed portfolio, and slid it into my bag. It was time to walk in, not as someone begging for approval, but as the architect of something they needed more than they realized. The hearing would be held in a closed session inside Fort Hadley. I'd never set foot in that room before, not because I wasn't allowed, but because no one had invited me. Now they had. At 04 gyro that morning, I stood outside the gates under low clouds, and Silence civilian badge clipped to my coat hair pulled back tight. Not a uniform, but not invisible. 2 guards checked my ID, then nodded. "Dr. Warren, they're expecting you." I entered without ceremony. No applause, no red carpet. But as I passed a group of naval officers on their way out of the East Wing, I noticed one stop mid-step. He stared, then elbowed the man beside him. "Is that her?" "Yeah," the other murmured. Keystone. They weren't looking at me like I was a curiosity anymore. They were looking at me like I was a threat. And for the first time in my life, I let them. I didn't need a microphone. The silence in the room was its own kind of amplifier. General Beale had just finished his keynote shaking hands with a few senior contractors when the back doors opened and a man in a crisp naval uniform stepped inside, quietly, purposefully. The hush wasn't instant, but it spread like a ripple, first in the row nearest the door, then outward, like a current passing through every spine in the room. I knew who he was before I fully turned. Admiral Thorne. Not just a Navy flag officer. He was the top strategic liaison between Joint Defense Command and foreign partners in the Indo-Pacific, which meant every algorithm I'd authored over the past 7 years, he'd seen them, tested them, fought with them. He didn't walk toward the main table, the one my brother was still seated at, cracking some low joke to a colleague. Instead, Admiral Thorne walked directly toward me. He didn't glance at the program, didn't look for an official, didn't hesitate. When he reached me, he didn't offer a handshake. He stood at attention. Then, slowly, without fanfare, without a word, he saluted. The silence became physical. You could feel the weight of it settle into the carpet, into the bones of everyone seated, especially those who had smiled when they dismissed me earlier. Especially my brother. I didn't return the salute. I didn't have to. Civilian specialists aren't required to, but more than that, he wasn't saluting a rank. He was saluting the work, the battle-tested systems I had built quietly for years. He lowered his hand. Then came the sentence that ended the room. "Thank you, Dr. Jensen. Your input is required in the next briefing with the Prime Systems Committee. Immediately." A pause. Then he turned, looked finally at the round table, at the men and women in suits and ribbons, frozen halfway between polite confusion and dawning realization. He added without emotion, "We don't begin without her." And then he waited. That was when the chairs scraped back. Not all at once. Just one. Then another. People began to rise, not out of respect for me exactly, but because a 4-star Admiral just rewrote the room's hierarchy and in doing so rewrote their perception of me. My brother hadn't moved. His smile had vanished, replaced with something unreadable. His voice, so loud and confident just 5 minutes ago, was gone. I stepped forward. No announcement, no podium, no retaliation speech, just one quiet step toward the Admiral. He nodded once and walked beside me as I exited the room. As the doors closed behind us, I heard nothing. No applause, no whispered comments, just silence, the kind that follows a detonation you never saw coming. As we walked down the hallway, Admiral Thorne's voice was low. Controlled. You held back in there. I've learned that speaking louder doesn't make you heard, I replied. He allowed a small smile. They'll adjust their frequency now. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. They always saw me as the sister, the guest, the +1. You were never a +1. I stopped walking. He turned. That means more than you know. He didn't offer comfort or warmth. He didn't have to. In our world, recognition doesn't come with parades. It comes with access, with trust, with someone in uniform saying, "We don't begin without her." We reached the briefing room. Inside were 10 people I recognized directors, foreign attachés, command analysts. I'd studied their reports, dissected their language models, improved their live simulations. And until this moment, none of them had known the name of the woman who did it. But now, they did. I stepped into the room. This time, no one looked past me. No one checked their phone. Instead, someone pulled out the chair at the head of the table. And no one sat until I did. I don't remember every word from that session. I remember directives, projections, code inputs. I remember running 3 recalibrations on the spot, sketching on the whiteboard as questions came in like artillery. But what I remember most is the quiet when I finished. That full circle quiet. The same kind of silence that started my journey. But now it wasn't because they doubted me. It was because they finally saw me, not as a background consultant, not as someone's sister, not as the awkward civilian in a sea of uniforms, but as the woman who built something they didn't even know they'd needed until it saved them, until they realized they didn't move forward without it. When the session ended, Admiral Thorne spoke just once more as we exited toward the corridor. "They'll write your name on the next operational doctrine." I nodded. "That's not why I do it." "I know," he said. "That's why they'll remember it." I didn't cry, not then. But later that night, when I stepped into the quiet hotel room, pulled off my plain civilian coat, and saw the uniform still folded in the corner, the utility version I wore on deployment sites, same cut as the soldiers, but no rank, I placed it gently over the chair. And I smiled, because I didn't need a title stitched on fabric. I had something better now. I had been seen. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to remind them who I was, what I'd built, or how many times they'd laughed at me, because someone else already had. The moment Admiral Prewitt rose from his chair, silent, deliberate, and composed, the air in the room shifted like the pressure before a storm. My family froze. Aunt Deborah's fork stopped midway to her mouth. My uncle cleared his throat as if to dismiss a cough that wasn't there. I didn't move. I just stood there in the doorway, still holding the folded document case with the Navy crest on it. My uniform jacket was buttoned sharp, the subdued name tape stitched onto my chest. Rowan looked dull under the chandelier's soft light. But somehow it carried more weight than every word I'd ever spoken at this table. "Miss Rowan," the Admiral said, and it wasn't just a greeting, it was a recognition. He gave me a single nod, then turned slightly enough to cast his glance across the table. "I came to deliver this personally. You're being requested by name. Forward Operations Review in Brussels. Your clearance was already bumped up. Congratulations, Doctor." Dead silence. The man who had flown in from D.C. didn't glance at the others again. He handed me a thick envelope and stepped back, not like a subordinate, but like someone who had just delivered a message that needed no repetition. His expression didn't ask for permission, it gave confirmation. Then he left. The door shut with a soft click. It echoed louder than any of the insults I'd endured from this family. For a moment, I didn't speak. I didn't even look at them. I just pulled out my chair, the same seat I'd sat in as a kid, while they laughed about my little science awards and asked if I was ever going to do something practical, and sat down. You're going to Brussels, my cousin whispered. I placed the envelope gently beside my plate. Yes. That's NATO level, right? My uncle asked. But this time, he wasn't mocking. I didn't answer him. Instead, I looked across the table straight at my father. The man who once said, "No one's ever going to salute a girl with degrees instead of rank." His face was unreadable now. For the first time in my life, he wasn't towering. He was still seated. "I didn't know you were working with the Admiral." Aunt Deborah said, her tone too sweet now. "Why didn't you say anything last year at Christmas?" I met her gaze without blinking. "You were too busy telling me patents are just paperwork." No one laughed. I didn't offer an explanation. I didn't justify how I'd been quietly embedded in several defense advisory boards, or how my reports had reshaped one of the Pentagon's AI integration protocols. They wouldn't understand it anyway, not the complexity, not the responsibility, and certainly not the silence I'd kept all these years. "Anila," my sister said slowly, "why didn't you tell us any of this?" My voice was calm. "Because you weren't listening." The words weren't sharp, they weren't loud, but they landed hard, and finally, I saw it: recognition. Not of pride, not of guilt, just the faint dawning awareness that everything they thought they knew about me had shifted. I didn't gloat, I didn't smile. I just let them sit with it. I let them replay every time they'd said I was too much, or that I'd never understand how the real world worked because I lived in books. Every time they asked why I wasn't married yet. Every time they implied that my work was theoretical, soft, or irrelevant. And now, in one quiet nod from an admiral, that entire narrative collapsed. The envelope stayed sealed beside me. It didn't need to be opened here. Not for them. "I'll be flying out in 48 hours, I said simply. I only stopped by to say goodbye. That was the truth. I stood slowly gathering my coat. There was nothing dramatic about it. No final line, no loud chair scrape, no storming out. But as I turned, I noticed something. My father. He was about to stand. His hands shifted on the table's edge. His jaw moved as if to form a word. I paused. Not out of hope, not out of fear, but because that hesitation was all I had waited for, proof that he didn't see me as invisible anymore. I left before he could speak, and I never turned back.